Tonight, you are all here to learn about the Gibbstown Logistics Center and the caverns. They're going along with it. And so we are here to talk about, give you some information on that and prepare folks if you're interested in going to the public hearing that will be held on Wednesday, May 14th. It starts at 6 p.m. and it ends at 9 p.m. And also everything I'm saying we'll put in the chat. So don't worry, we'll follow up with that. So you will have an opportunity to either speak in person or attend virtually. I will be putting that information shortly in the chat on how you can register with the DEP, the NJDEP to learn about that. I will also be putting in the NJDEP draft permit notice if folks would like to read that, in addition to all the great information you're going to hear tonight. And if you do end up going to the hearing in person, the location will be at St. Michael's Mutual Club Event Hall in Gibbstown, New Jersey. And if you're going to go virtually, then you will just log in from your computer after you register. Make sure you register, though, if you're also going in person. So just as a reminder for our agenda tonight, we're going to talk about what the draft permit proposes, description of the project and the issues that are going along with it. We're going to talk about what's going on. We're going to talk about what are the risks of LPG, potential impacts, and what points you folks can use in your comments if you're interested in learning more. And again, just a reminder throughout, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Hector Brandt, who is our Energy Fellow over at Delaware Riverkeeper Network.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hector. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our topic of discussion today is the two massive caverns that this draft permit authorizes the Delaware River Partners, a subsidiary of New Fortress Energy, to build. They will have a volume, an estimated volume anyways, of 640,000 barrel underground storage cavern systems, and that includes a central complex designed to connect the cavern systems. Peter, could you get to the next slide? Here you can see the two caverns that I'm referring to. There's one that's a little bit further north and one that's a bit south. And you can see there in the middle, it's the central complex that will be connecting the two cavern systems. In the red circle, that's a pre-existing cavern. That's not an issue today, but it does exist, and that's also a cavern that's been used to store different things over time. All right, so while this permit does allow the construction of the cavern, it does not in any way cover the operation of the caverns. That's going to be a separate permit for which Delaware River Partners will need to apply. And liquefied petroleum gas, also known as LPG, is the product that will be stored, not LNG, since that's prohibited by New Jersey state law. Peter, next slide, please. The liquefied petroleum gas is going to be stored in these caverns. This is a cross section of the cavern, and the plan is for the galleries and the crosscuts to be about 20 feet wide and 35 to 40 feet in height. Next slide, please. And this is just another way of viewing it. As you can see, they're going to be really deep underground. You can see there's the water table sitting there along the top, and the plan is for these caverns to be about 700 feet below the surface. Now, in the case that DRP decides not to build these caverns themselves and sell the site to someone else, the permit would stay intact during that sale. So all the conditions of the permit would be automatically transferred to the new owner, and they would be able to build the caverns in the case that DRP doesn't move forward with this. So that's why it's important to think about the long-term consequences of the permit. The permit will stay alive no matter who owns the property, and I think that's kind of a key factor here. All right, let's go to the next slide, Peter. So a word on the Industrial Site Remediation Act, ISRA, and the former use of the site. The Gibbstown site has a long and concerning history of industrial pollution. Starting in the early 1880s, DuPont developed what used to be uninhabited forests and fields and a dairy farm into a research and production facility for dynamite. By 1881, the plant was already producing over 2,000 pounds of dynamite per day. And DuPont is a major chemicals company even to this day. The site continued to expand over the course of decades. And of course, in those days, there was little to no environmental or pollution control regulating industrial practices. Between 1880 and 1998, DuPont developed anything from dynamite to high explosives for military use to a wide range of chemicals for industrial use. For example, during World War II alone, 4.5 billion pounds of military explosives were produced on this site. Repauno later purchased the site in 1998 and continued chemical operations for roughly another 11 years. One more slide, please, Peter. Uh, Kind of what I'm going to show now is some of these historical photos over the course of time. Here you have an example from roughly 1913 of an explosion that left a crater. And there are many, many examples of this happening on the site, showing not only what a dangerous job it was to work on the site, but all the pollution that went into the ground during the production of these explosives, and also if they happen to explode, all of that stuff going into the ground as well. Next slide. This is kind of a little bit earlier on the side, but of this site, but you can start to see just how developed it became, and over time it became even more developed. Next slide. This is kind of the peak of production in the 1970s, although they continued to, use the site pretty heavily. This is kind of the time where they had the most buildings and were doing the most work at this location. And next slide. All right, so remediation of soil and groundwater contamination due to the decades of intense pollution that we just covered is underway. Cement caps have been placed over the shallow soils containing the most dangerous concentrations of arsenic and what's called a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, which is a group of known carcinogens. But blasting out the caverns will involve mining through at least one of these or potentially more of these capped areas. Delaware River Partners does promise to stay in compliance with the relevant remedial action permit, but even if it does, the contaminated soils will be disturbed and exposed to the elements. One of our concerns is, for example, the water runoff from excavated material is bound to end up in the Delaware and in our drinking water. Next slide, please. This brings me to other concerns for our water. Water, perhaps mixed with other fluids, is going to be used in the drilling process, and these fluids will be used in what is called the circular fashion. And that means that basically the fluids that are used for drilling are going to get pumped out of the caverns once they're used, and then they're going to get used again. In this circular fashion, the fluids will become more and more contaminated with every use. And then after drilling is complete, the current plan is for the contaminated fluids to be stored in a retention pond. And the issue is that there's no indication, as far as we're aware, that the fluids are going to be treated to Clean Water Act standards, and that's going to be a problem. Once the caverns are built, the permit application estimates that 200 gallons of water per hour is going to infiltrate the caverns from the sides due to the pressure being so far underground on an ongoing basis. And this water has to be pumped out from the caverns. Again, there's no indication that the pumped water will be treated when discharged, and we're concerned about that because it's going to infiltrate from all levels of the cavern and kind of filter through all the liquefied petroleum product, and it's going to be contaminated in some capacity when it's pumped out, and it's just going to go out into our water system. Excavated material is going to be stocked in a designated placement area on site, which is on top of and adjacent to wetlands. Next slide. You can see here in kind of on the right side of the map in the yellow hash marks, that's the area where the excavated material is going to be stored. It's going to be kept on site rather than being placed somewhere else, which in some ways is a good thing because we don't want a bunch of trucks carrying contaminated material going through Gibbstown itself. But because it's on and next to wetlands, there's going to be a risk for erosion and sediment runoff into those wetlands. And if you go to the next slide, the increased flooding risks due to climate change will increase the risk of that contamination going into the wetlands because of flooding and ultimately into the river. This is a map that Delaware River Partners provided from the year, what they believe will be happening in the year 2050. This is a scenario that includes sea level change due to climate change, as well as heavy rain and storm surges. So this is kind of a worst case scenario map for 2050, but it is likely to happen because storms will become more and more common. And as you can see in the little red outline is our construction site for the caverns, including the area where all the contaminated material and rock and debris that they bring up from underground is going to be stored. When flooding like this happens, it just increases the probability that all that stuff goes into the river in ways that we think are concerning. Next slide, please. As far as endangered species go, this project will impact rare wildlife species and wildlife habitat. On or near this site, surveyors have documented bald eagles and their nests, osprey and their nest, Cooper's hawks, great blue herons, peregrine falcons, wood thrush, Atlantic sturgeon, short-nosed sturgeon, pink streaks, which is a kind of moth. I didn't know about that. Lancaster flat sedge, and vernal pool habitat. Next slide. Now, this is an interesting map. According to Delaware River Partners, these are the bald eagle and osprey nests near the construction site. The concentric circles represent the different buffer zones from 1,000 feet down to 330 feet. So if you see the first circle is like in a pink color, that's a 1,000-foot buffer. And then the yellow is 660 feet, and the green is 330 feet. DRP claims that no construction-related activity is going to occur within 660 feet of bald eagle nests, except for the transloading of excavated material. And you can kind of see that in the yellow hash marked area again. It overlaps with the radius of every one of those buffers for one of the nests. Unloading of the excavated material, which uses heavy equipment and trucks, is going to happen very close to at least one bald eagle nest. Next picture, please. And Delaware River Partners also provided this map, which shows how far a gas cloud will extend in the case of a catastrophic release. This refers to, like, for example, if a valve failed, how far the gas cloud would expand, like what radius it would have, and the different colors. So the pink would be for the smallest catastrophic failure, and the green would be for the like a medium-sized one. And you can barely see it, but around the edge, there's a small blue circle. For all intents and purposes, in my mind, these are very similar in size, and these would impact the nests. Next slide, please. Something interesting happens when you lay these maps on top of each other. They didn't provide it this way, but when you do perform this, it becomes pretty clear that if there were to be a release, and we think because like these caverns are going to be operated for such a long period of time, it's going to be decades and decades, the odds of something going wrong is pretty high. If there is a catastrophic release, some of the nests in question would definitely be within the range of that gas cloud, or at least in a concerning proximity to it. And that's assuming that no new bald eagle or osprey pairs build a new nest that's even closer to the site. All right, next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, the permit we're discussing today doesn't give DRP the authority to operate the caverns once they're constructed. So theoretically, they could build the caverns and then get denied a permit to actually use them. It seems unlikely, because if they're going to all this trouble and the state is allowing them to go through all this trouble to build the caverns, it stands to reason that they think the operating permit is going to go through as well. But today's permit just allows them to build 2 caverns. DRP will need a number of additional permits to operate the caverns, and we're not really sure what those are, the total number of permits, because DRP hasn't disclosed all of the equipment that's going to be necessary to operate the caverns. However, we do believe it's likely that among the permits necessary to operate them, DRP will need to obtain a Title V permit for major sources under the Clean Air Act. Again, that's going to depend on details that are not yet available to the public. And I'll give a couple examples here. For example, how much equipment is necessary to maintain proper pressurization of the caverns? What equipment is necessary to provide proper refrigeration? Tracy is going to talk about this a little bit more, but they plan to cool these caverns down to very low temperatures. And as you all know, cooling equipment requires a lot of energy. How will liquefied petroleum liquids be transported to the site? So we know the caverns are meant to store them, but how are they going to get there? And are they going to need to build a pipeline to do that? Do they plan to transport it all on trucks? And while LNG isn't going to be stored in the caverns, DRP does plan to transload LNG onto ships on the site. There's questions about how they're going to do that. But if they do use trucks to transport LNG as well as the liquefied petroleum, it's going to require hundreds, if not thousands, of truck trips per day, which is a super unacceptable result. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, DRP has so far applied for these two caverns. However, as you can see on the screen right now, it has released schematics for a bigger plan. They plan to build two more larger caverns after these initial ones. And you can kind of see those outlined in slightly lighter black. They're a little bit more to the east and a little bit more to the west. And they're actually even bigger than the two that they're applying for in this permit. And so what they're doing is they're chopping up the project into little segments, getting one approved at a time. And this is just giving you a picture of what's going to happen in the future, or what they're going to apply for in the future. Tracy can touch on that in more detail, but at the end of the day, what we're discussing here today might just be the tip of the iceberg for this project. And I'll leave it to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Hector. Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Carluccio, Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network. I'm going to touch on some of the other things related and expand on some of the things that Hector brought up. But let's take a look at the dangers of liquefied petroleum gas, which, as you heard, LPG is what they're going to plan to be storing here. Delaware River Partners says they're going to use propane, butane, and propylene, but they don't say they're only going to use those. They say they include those and predominantly will use those. But there are many other gases that are under the definition of liquid gases that are allowed according to the New Jersey cavern rules. So there could be other gases there. They had to do an environmental and health assessment as a result of those cavern rules, but they only looked at the three gases that they say they're predominantly are going to include. So we don't have the information from them, and we feel we need that. These gases are highly flammable. It's very difficult to extinguish a fire. Once a fire starts, they pretty much let it burn, and they have to evacuate about a mile. Also, they can be explosive. They can ignite even in a closed tank under certain conditions. There are poisonous gases that are released in a fire that are not controlled. They're just emitted to the atmosphere. And a very heavy and visible cloud can travel really far from the point of release. That's what's wrong with those pictures that Hector showed you, because they show a neat radius. In fact, if there's wind blowing, you have to do an air dispersion model to understand, where that cloud is actually going to move. Since it's a heavy cloud, it will go along ditches, which could be the waterways there, and be carried much further than they say that release would carry any sort of fire or explosion or pollution should there be a catastrophic event. All these gases are classified as hazardous by every major agency, and they're classified as toxic by the Toxic Substance Control Act. And there are known health risks related to the exposure to these gases. A release can cause suffocation due to robbing oxygen from the air. It can cause frostbite if you're in proximity to it. That's for the workers on the site, or if you're in proximity to the cloud. It causes respiratory damage, and repeated doses of some of these gases have reproductive and developmental toxicity and other toxicities. And we don't even know what synthetic gas is, because that's just beginning to be understood now as it's being developed. And under the cavern rules in New Jersey, they could store a synthetic gas as well. One of the world's worst industrial disasters was a liquefied petroleum gas release. It was in San Juanico in Mexico, and 500 to 600 people were killed, and 5,000 to 7,000 people were injured. And it was a release of LPG that resulted in fire and multiple explosions. Now, this was not a cavern. It was on surface storage, but it shows you, you can go to Wikipedia. This link will be in the talking points that we provide in the action alert after the webinar tonight, but you can go to Wikipedia and read about it. What it does is it shows you the power of liquefied petroleum gas. Next slide, please. So let's look at the risks and the impacts of the proposed Gibbstown cavern. Hector already covered some of these, but they will vent or flare pollutants all the time, and that's volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, total suspended particulates, PM10, particulate matter 10, lead, hazardous air pollutants, and more. And that is done through the venting and flaring every day. Gas that's stored in these caverns, as Hector explained, can leak into the groundwater through the walls of the cavern. And that can pollute the aquifer, particularly if there's a fracture that carries that polluted material up to the surface, and it can pollute the river and wetlands. The excavated soil and rock that's going to be produced by the blasting out of these enormous caverns may contain pollutants such as radioactivity and asbestos. We don't think they have done a good enough analysis of the rock. They did some sampling, but we think it needs to be much more to make sure there's not going to be radioactive rock and asbestos brought up when it comes to the surface. The excavated material is planned to be spread on the site to raise it above the floodplain. Now, there's a lot of negative environmental impacts about filling in the floodplain, but if it's contaminated material, then what you're doing is spreading that pollution outwards. You're releasing it into the environment and providing a pollution pathway that never occurred until that material was brought to the surface. Additionally, as Hector mentioned, the waste pile where they're going to be storing it is located near wetlands and can be moved through stormwater runoff and into the wetlands, but also it touches on to a Tier 3 wellhead protection area for a water supply well for the public system of Gibbstown, and that's unacceptable. And Hector also mentioned when they drill, they're going to be drilling shafts down to about 600 feet where they will start blasting and build the cavern down to 700 or 800 feet. And they use drilling fluid to lubricate the drill, and it contains contaminants. And the waste of that, which, as Hector explained, is going to be recycled and stored in a pond, poses a water quality threat, and it can pollute the soil. And what Delaware River Partners is planning to do is just cover that pond over and leave it on site. That is totally unacceptable. Next slide, please. The Gibbstown cavern risks continued are that the construction entails blasting and drilling, 3 years of impactful disruption. And it's interesting when you look at those maps, they only talk about it in the area right where they're going to be constructing, but it's on the river. There's river traffic going by. There's people that live across the river in Pennsylvania. There's communities that are environmental justice communities that are on both the New Jersey and the Pennsylvania side that are in proximity should a catastrophic event occur, but will also be impacted by the polluting air emissions that are every day going to be released from this facility and lowering our air quality. Those pollutants also deposit on the surface of water and pollute our water. So we're talking about very dense populations here in this area. And normally a cavern like this would not be built so close to where people live. They seem to think it's fine, and all of their application paper statements say that because it's 1 mile before you get to residence, when you measure from where this construction is going on, there's not going to be any adverse impacts at all to the public. And we don't believe that. We believe that wind blows and moves pollutants. We believe that the air that we breathe does not have walls around it, around this site. It moves out into the river. It moves across the river, and it moves to Paulsboro, which is an environmental justice community, and other very dense populated communities. It moves to Camden. We have environmental justice communities all over this area because of the legacy and ongoing pollution of industrial development here, particularly oil and gas. It also is very close to sensitive ecosystems. You heard that list from Hector in terms of the habitats that are verified for being in the area that are around the construction facility. Also vulnerable infrastructure like the Commodore Barry Bridge. Also the airport is right there. River traffic, the navigation channel goes right by there, and it's a very busy river traffic all the time. The site is still contaminated. We know this. This has been made very clear through Hector's presentation about what DuPont did there. 100 years of emissions, and that makes it very clear that the Comores, which is now in charge of cleaning up the DuPont mess, will have its hands full for a very long time. Also, the upstream and downstream cradle to grave impacts. What happens when you frack for the gas and extract it from wells? What happens along the transportation route when you bring it here by trucks or pipeline or by rail? What happens along there, and what the releases are, what the potential impacts are, and then what actually happens when they transload it, because they deliberately say that they removed any assessment of the transloading operations from this permit. So we don't understand even. They say they'll be using a pipe, for instance, to get it from the cavern to waiting ships at the dock, but we don't really know exactly what that system is, and we don't know what the risks are in terms of a valve breaking loose or some sort of accident associated with the transloading, which is the most dangerous part of any of this type of handling of these gases. And then you have the ships that then will be loaded up and moved downriver and out to the ocean, and there's no analysis of that or even consideration that those ships are sitting right even within that impact area that Hector showed you on that map, because the dock 1 is right there, and they want to build a second dock where there's 2 berths. It's a much larger dock, and they would be sitting right there within the area that would be impacted should there be a release. And then the final thing I want to say about the cradle to grave is that and the overall impacts is that the climate crisis is made worse by site emissions, and because it's going to require fracking new wells in order to get the natural gas liquids to fill these caverns up and so they can sell this product. And that's because greenhouse gas emissions will increase with fracking. And this is the moment in time when we dramatically need to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in order to get a handle on the climate crisis. Next slide, please. So the proposed Gibbstown underground liquid gas storage caverns are a bad idea. Delaware River Partners, as Hector said, that plans to build at least 2 more of them right at this very site. You saw that hatched area on the map. By allowing them to break up their development into separate projects, what they're doing, DEP is allowing, is segmentation. You're going to be having individual permits looking at the individual impacts from each of these permits that are given out, and nobody is going to ever look at the cumulative impacts and the air that we breathe and the environmental impacts that come with the entire project. They cannot chop it up this way. This is a trick that's used to minimize the environmental and public health impacts all the time, and it's unacceptable. The required environmental and health impact statement then is flawed. This is the first one ever done under the new New Jersey cavern rules. And they need to include the entire projected build out and the entire facility's emissions in order to be able to understand what are people going to be breathing as a result of this project. What is the increase in the pollutants that this project will daily put out into the air and could put out through accidents or releases, unintended releases? DEP must not consider this construction permit until they look at and do a full assessment on the air permit. As Hector mentioned, a Title V major permit is expected for this project, and that's needed. We need to understand what the air what's going to happen to the air. Also, the Toxic Catastrophe Protection Act has to do an analysis. They have one for the site now. That should be done before this construction permit is even considered. The overall risks of this project are too great. Why would we want to build more infrastructure at this location? It's subject to sea level rise, storm and flood impacts, as Hector showed you on those maps. The caverns are actually in the floodway of the Delaware River, and the construction area is in the floodplain. And the threats to the community, to public health, to people on both sides of the river, to river traffic itself are just too great. They're of catastrophic proportion. There's no benefit for the public. The only benefit is for this company, Delaware River Partners, to make money for their own purposes, their special interest. So these massive and local, regional, and public costs are going to last throughout the operation. It's going to be decades of operation. We don't know the exact time that they are projecting, but because they're not looking at the cradle to grave, we really cannot understand, what this project is. And we need to understand what this project means to the people that live here, the people who will be impacted day in and day out, the people in the region, and our river environment. So that's, I think that's our last slide for now, except I want to move on and just tell you what you can do, and then we're going to go to questions and answers. So next slide. You can sign up right now to testify. Delaware Riverkeeper Network is opposed to this permit, and we're going to be opposing it through technical comments that we make. But you can go and testify by signing up now, registering at the link that Annika is putting into the chat, and we're going to be sending out an action alert giving that link again. You can go in person, which is in Gibbstown, or you can virtually testify, but you need to register ahead. And next slide, please. The final thing that you can do is submit a written comment, and there's a comment period open through June 16th. You can email your comments in, but also Delaware Riverkeeper Network has an easy way for you to fill in your comments into a template that we provide in our action alert, and it goes directly to DEP. We also provide at that action alert suggested talking points and some references that you can use if you want to expand on your comment, and also provide the link to the permit itself if you want to delve deeper. So we're going to be sharing all this information again after the webinar. We'll be sending out a webinar recording to everybody who registered, and also all of this information with the talking points. But right now, why don't we go to questions and answers? I'm going to turn it back over to Annika.
Thanks, Tracy. You are both great. So if I ask a question, I think either of you can answer it, feel free. So the first question is, did you come across any information that told you what type of rock these caverns are? I don't know if you found that in anything, if they describe that.
Yes, both Hector and I can probably answer that, but yes, it's the Wissahickon schist, and it's a hard rock cavern, and there are seams of other types of rock like quartz that go through it. There's a lot of information in the technical documents that you can get by going to the draft permit. It's very interesting, and there's quite a bit of information there, but it is the Wissahickon schist. Would you like to add to that, Hector?
No, I don't have anything to add. They have a whole history of the geological formations of the site, and it goes into quite a bit of detail.
Great. Hector, in any of your research, did you come across any other LPG storage caverns in the US?
It's my understanding that there are other LPG storage caverns. I think, like Tracy said, though, they are not usually, and I don't know if we have any examples of any that are this close to population centers, but they do exist and they are used across the US, I think mostly out west.
And there are two locations in New Jersey. One of them is this location at Gibbstown because of the cavern that, as we said, already existed. It was built by DuPont, and it was used for many years for anhydrous ammonia. It was shut down, and then in 2017, it was reopened by the Repauno Works, who bought the facility, New Fortress Energy being the affiliate of Delaware River Partners. And they bought it, and they now store butane in it. So that was one location. The other is the Phillips refinery, and that is up around Elizabeth, and there are storage caverns there. They are further away from populations than these because they have a larger site. But a lot of these, if they get permission to build these caverns, this will be the largest in New Jersey, the largest cavern system in New Jersey. And if they build 4 of them, it could very well be the biggest in the whole mid-Atlantic.
Things just moved around. So folks are wondering about, and I think you could both speak to this if you're interested. What are the importance of submitting comments or including in their comments on the topic of segmentation in a project like this?
Yeah, Hector, you want to take that from a legal perspective?
Sure. I mean, I would encourage this from a legal perspective. I think what segmentation does is it tries to get around painting the whole picture for the permitting process by chopping it up into these small pieces. And I think it's relevant for the decision makers to think about the whole picture and know that the people who are affected care about the whole picture, not just these little projects that they divided up into. So I think it's relevant not only from just like a well-being perspective, but from a legal perspective, since it would affect, if they put it all together, it would affect whether or not it gets permitted. And Tracy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's great. Thank you, Hector. Yeah, we did put in a talking point in the document that you'll see with the suggested points that you can make addressing this cumulative impact issue.
Yeah.
And then another question we have is, Tracy, for any of the work that you've done and how you've done this project, what have you heard from nearby residents or from others around the Gibbstown project in terms of, if you've heard dismay, if you've heard support, what have you heard as you've worked on this about how locals are feeling about this project?
Very little information is available to the public on this, and that's why we're having this webinar tonight and doing action alerts, because people who even live there are not really aware that this is going on. They do have to go to the township for approval, so it's discussed if you happen to be at a township meeting. And those that we are in contact with, we have many members who live in the area, and our Delaware River Frac Ban Climate Action Coalition is very active in the area and has a lot of members. And so our colleague organizations and Delaware Riverkeeper Network have folks that know about this and are very concerned. There's concern because this is unprecedented to build these very big caverns in this location and to make this the largest gas cavern storage facility in New Jersey cuts new ground. And why should people who live right up against it have to be the guinea pigs to find out whether or not it's safe? And we don't feel that they have proven that this project is safe. We think the analyses leave a lot of information out. They provide a lot of information and check a lot of boxes that are required under the cavern rules, but they also leave a lot of information out. And what they leave out is what is most concerning to people, which is the whole picture and what would happen if the wind happens to be blowing when there's an accident, or if a truck happens to blow up when it's on its way on the highway through South Jersey or across Pennsylvania. What would happen should a ship have a problem when it's on the river? And we're very far upriver for this type of export facility to be located, and it's a very busy and narrow navigation channel, and there not that many in the United States that have these types of export terminals this far upriver. So it's a perilous journey downriver and then to the ocean, and all of that is not considered. And we have people who have called us from Delaware because they heard about this and they were concerned about the ships going by. So I think that the public generally is not really aware of this, and that's why we're trying to sort of shout it from the rooftops, and get people to sign up to testify, to let DEP know people care, and let Delaware River Partners know that this is not being given a pass by folks. People want to be assured that this project is not going to lower water quality, air quality, or affect the quality of their lives. And the information provided in this permit does not do that. And that's mainly what we hear from people, that they're worried. So I think, I don't know if that answers it, or Hector, you want to add to it?
Tracy, that's a great answer. I don't really have a lot to add to this, besides just expanding a tiny bit on the point that you made, that what's not in the materials provided in the application can be of most concern. They go into great efforts to say that certain bad results are not expected. And that's because there are a low percentage chance of happening. But again, because these caverns are going to be operated for presumably decades if we aren't able to stop it, and because presumably hundreds, if not thousands of trucks are going to be carrying this material every day, those small percentages become just that much more likely through repetition and through just over time.
Great. Yeah, I think this is another question. You both probably have different perspectives, but maybe Hector, if you want to start off. Folks who are in Pennsylvania are wondering what's the worth of their comment going that this is for New Jersey and going to NJDEP. So what should folks in Pennsylvania feel that they should be submitting comments?
Yeah, Hector, if you want to take that from a legal perspective.
Sure. I think people in Pennsylvania do have standing, and they have standing because of, and I think you put this in a really great way, Tracy. The way the wind travels isn't contained by the walls of New Jersey. What happens in New Jersey, especially when it's just right across the river, is going to affect Pennsylvania residents as well. The environment doesn't follow the borders that we've drawn on the map, and as we saw, the cloud of gas, even by the standards given in the report, are widespread, and those can be blown into Pennsylvania. And so I think from that perspective, Pennsylvania residents would have standing.
Totally agree. And the river is only about a little over a mile wide there. So right away, you're in Tinicum Township, you're in Chester, you're in Delaware County, you're in Eastwick, Edgemore, you're right there. Everything is right there, right on the other side of the river.
Okay. And the final question that I have in the Q&A box, so if anybody has any other questions, now's your time to pop it in there. Is did you guys read anything about these caverns being used for, or if you think there's any possibility or anything of the caverns being used to store methane?
I don't know exactly what they mean by methane, but Hector?
I didn't see anything about methane specifically, but I do know that cavern that they have, it's a pre-existing cavern from the late 60s, was used to store anhydrous methane. So I suppose it's possible.
Yeah, and just in terms of other things they could store there, in our talking points, you'll see we bring up the fact that there could be other uses for these caverns down the road that we don't know about now. And one of them, even though liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is prohibited by state law to be put in these underground caverns, other gases can be. And the definition, you can drive a truck through it, that's in the cavern rules. It's very, very broad. So we're concerned that they might be able to store carbon there, for instance, like carbon sequestration, or they might try to store hydrogen there. Now, whether or not they could do that and get it down to the cryogenic temperatures they would need would be a technical question, but the fact is that the Mach 2 proposed hydrogen hub has this Repauno site mapped as part of Mach 2. They don't say what it's for. They say they also have it mapped as a PSE&G site, which makes it sound like somehow that utility company would be involved. So all of this information we've been trying to fight for through the Freedom of Information Act, and we haven't gotten what we really need to understand it. But the fact is, it's on the map, this Repauno site, as being part of the Mach 2 proposed hydrogen hub. So maybe hydrogen they would try to store there. So that there's a lot of different liquid. It has to be liquid, but they freeze it down to a lower temperature. It can be liquid.
All right, and those are all the questions that I have seen.
Okay, great. So we really appreciate everyone coming out tonight because we want to close out with encouraging people to take action. Learning about things is great, and that's what we need to do first in order to understand, what is this all about? It's really important to actually, sign up with DEP and go to the hearing, because you can do it virtually. So that means you can just do it from your home if you can't go in person. And it's really important for DEP to hear that people care about this. And the suggested points that we're providing through that link that's in the chat, we'll send out afterwards, give you tremendous amount of information that you can pick and choose from, or you can delve further into the permit and develop comments. Now, a couple things about this. I asked DEP how many minutes everybody has, and they said they're going to decide that the day of the hearing. Well, I guess once they see who's signed up. But I would suggest to everybody, plan to have 3 minutes, and maybe you could expand beyond that, but at least plan to have 3 minutes. But you can really take, even less than that if you just want to say who you are and that you're concerned and where you live. It's just important for DEP to know that the public cares. So joining virtually or going to the Gibbstown event hall is really consequential, and it's a physical way that we can make a statement by being there. Then also you can submit a written comment, and written comments are really important. Sometimes people think, well, what does it mean if I put something on a record and they go ahead and give the permit anyway? We really don't know whether or not this permit is going to be issued. This is a draft permit. It took them a long time to get it in good enough technical shape to even be put out for draft consideration by the public. We commented many, many times over the last year and a half on this, on the permit as it went through its administrative and technical reviews at DEP. And it's by submitting a written comment, you're again showing that the public cares, but you can go into more detail if you want to. And again, those talking points that we're providing will help, but there's lots of other information in the document that we'll be sharing or in the draft permit that you can delve into and comment on. You don't have to be an expert. We feel that the public are the experts. We're the ones breathing the air. We're the ones drinking the water. We're the ones that live here and have our quality of life impacted by projects like this. So we're the experts. And don't feel like you have to be some sort of technical expert to talk about something which might sound kind of nerdy, like caverns. Just go ahead, sign up to testify, or plan to submit a written comment. It's very easy through the Delaware Riverkeeper Network system, because all you have to do is fill out the template with the talking points and we send it in for you. So please join us in opposing this permit. Speak your mind to DEP, and remember, Delaware River Partners and their affiliate New Fortress Energy are listening too. So we need to tell them we're here and we're not going to be run over. Special interests are not going to rule. We're going to rule. So step up and take take part in this public participation process. So thank you all for joining tonight. I want to thank Annika for handling those questions, and if you think of questions afterwards, we're going to be sending an email out with the recording and also the link to our action alert, and you can respond by asking some questions. Hector, did you want to add anything before we closed out tonight?
Not much. Thank you all for coming. This is a really important project, and we appreciate you learning about it. I would appreciate your support in opposing it.
Yes, thank you all very much for coming. We really appreciate it. Annika, did you want to add anything?
Share with people and help us get the word out, as always.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Hope to see you down in Gibbstown.